Good afternoon and welcome to today's special webcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Jean-Pierre Lehmann, Professor of International Political Economy at IMD, and Professor Xiao Geng, Director of Research and Director of Studies at the Fung Global Institute. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining us today by satellite from Hong Kong. Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.
So Xiao Geng, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the activities of the Fung Global Institute?
Sure, yeah. The Fung Global Institute is a new think tank established just 6 months ago. We are trying to develop innovative ways to do research on global issues, but from Asian perspectives. And now we have 4 projects trying to understand the different aspects of the global economy. And one is the global supply chain, which focuses on the real sector and will be led by our chairman, Victor Fung, who is expert on supply chain. And the second project is about finance, which we focus on finance in Asia in 2020, and it will be led by our president, Andrew Shen. He is an expert on finance. And the third project is on evolving growth models in China and India and the role of market and state. And this fourth project is about sustainability, which we will focus on Asia's sustainable lifestyle, sustainable development. And it will be led by Nobel Prize economist Michael Spence and also Nick Stern. So these are the 4 projects we are working on, and we would like to develop a holistic approach to do the research and also trying to integrate knowledge in a way which can be accessible to business leaders, policymakers. So we will actually bring them together into our platform.
So some very interesting research projects going on there, and I guess we'll get to those in a little bit more detail as our webcast progresses. Jean-Pierre, IMD has recently become affiliated with the Fung Global Institute. What does this affiliation mean for both parties?
Okay, there's a few things that I think need to be put first in context. There was a very long established relationship with Dr. Victor Fung, the founder of the Fung Global Institute. He was also previously chairman of the Evian Group. I've known him for a long time. He's a business statesman with great concerns about trade issues, and obviously a lot of the projects, all the projects that Xiao Geng mentioned have trade implications. Hence, they are very much within the remit of the Evian Group. I think there's also advantages in terms of the locations. The Evian Group is situated in Lausanne, near Geneva, where trade policy is made. Hong Kong is in Greater China, where trade is made. And obviously, there's a considerable amount here of potential synergies. In terms of actual concretely, and bearing in mind what Xiao Geng said, that the Fung Global Institute has been in operation for 6 months, but already we've got collaboration going in the global supply chain project between Fung Global Institute and IMD with Carlos Cordon's outfit. We are sharing knowledge, using knowledge platforms and so on, and will continue to do so. In the area of finance, there's a considerable amount of interest because given the fact that most of the wealth now is moving to this part of the world, it'll clearly have all sorts of implications in terms of global finance, and a number of the finance professors at IMD have expressed considerable interest. In terms of sustainability also, and so the activities under the direction of Francisco Zekeli are ones that we're looking at. So there's a good number of projects that we can work together on, which will be to the benefit of both institutions, but also to the benefit of both institutions' stakeholders.
Thank you. So, Xiao Geng, you mentioned before different projects that you're involved with and that you're researching. When we look at the evolving models, what do we see as the growth and governance challenges for China and the different models that may be emerging in the next 3 to 5 years?
For the next few years, China is trying very hard to change its growth model from export driven to consumption driven, and India, on the other hand, is trying to develop more infrastructure, more manufacture. So for China, because the size of the Chinese economy, it actually generates some very obvious trends over the last 30 years. And one major trend is that the cost of labor, the income are rising very fast, and also the housing prices are rising very fast. And what we call non-tradables, in China, their prices are rising very, very fast. So that's a major phenomenon, and which is already generating inflation, what I call structural inflation in China. So this is one issue. And there are another two trends. One is the price of capital, the scarcity of capital in China is actually rising very fast because of very rapid urbanization. And the other is the demand on resources, is also growing very rapidly, which already affected the global commodities price. And so these three trends are posing serious challenges to both the business and the government, because they actually not only create efficiency problems, but also fairness. Some of the people who invested in property, they're getting richer and richer, but some of the migrant workers, they work very hard, put money in the bank, and actually because of inflation, because of low interest rate, they are losing. Some of the people who put deposit, they are actually in the bank, actually subsidizing people who borrow money, have mortgage with the bank. So all these issues is creating difficulties, challenges in China.
If I can just add something here, Paul, I think one of the important implications for people who are going to be watching this webcast is that there's a danger of having a static image of China. Potentially the changes that are taking place now, these new trends, are as important, as fundamental as they were in China's initial first phase of radical economic change 30 years ago. So this is a China which is in great ferment, and that it requires to be watched very closely.
So let's dig into one of those. You talked about the rising labor costs. I think a lot of people will associate some of the spectacular growth and success that we've seen from China in recent years. For a lot of people, they will associate that with the low labor cost. With these rising costs, what does this mean? What can China do? What are the levers that China can pull to address these rising labor costs?
Well, if you look at the situation for last 30 years, the first 20 years, the Chinese wages did not really rise much, largely because there was huge surplus labors in China, and when there were people waiting in line for jobs, the companies usually don't need to raise wage; they can still get more labor. But because of the demographic situation in China, those surplus labors are disappearing. And so as a result, the wage started rising. And this is actually a signal of success. Basically means that China has been able to create jobs, create income. And this income is actually going to be transformed into purchasing power in the global economy. So that's why we are seeing Chinese imports are growing very fast. And China actually just run trade deficit, in the most recent data. So this is all good news for the global economy, because the Chinese rising income is going to create more and more purchasing power to buy foreign produced products. And in China, this is also good news in the sense that Chinese industries are upgrading, from very simple assembly to more value-added activities. But the problem is that this process is going through a long period of time and will continue for a long time because of the size of the Chinese economy. So what we're going to see is some continuing wage increases, and it will eventually be reflected in what I call structural inflation in China. And basically this is a kind of convergence of price and the wage between China and the advanced economies. So they are very healthy kind of phenomenon, but sometimes the mainstream economists, the series don't recognize this. So in China, a lot of people are concerned about the wage increase, inflation, property price increases. So there are policymakers trying to stop inflation, and that could create a lot of problems, right? Because you cannot stop the rising wage, but you want to, for example, you want to fix the price of electricity, and that's going to be difficult. So this kind of challenges are coming in the next few years.
You mentioned also before not only the rising labor costs, but the consumption and resources. By 2050, approximately 60% of resources will be consumed by Asia. Are we able to cope with that on our planet?
Well, yeah, that's really the key question. At the moment, the U.S., the Europe, they are struggling with recovery, so they're hoping China to consume more. But the question is, if China start to consume like American, with big house, big car, we are going to run out of resources very quickly. So the question really is how people in China, people in India, people in Asia, how are they going to choose their lifestyle? Whether they want to live like people in Hong Kong, high-rise buildings, very compact public transport systems, or they live in like Beijing. Beijing is a very, very big city. They have second ring, third ring, fourth ring. The city gets bigger and bigger, and there are a lot of traffic. So I think the question is real. There's limited resources, and how are we going to use those resources efficiently is the key. And I think we have enough resources to support the continued rise of living standards, but we do not have enough resources to sponsor the current lifestyle. So we really need to change lifestyles to take into account the scarcity of natural resources. And that is a question for business, but also for the community, not just at the national level, but also at the international level. How we find the best way to support rising income, modern lifestyle, but at a much, much lower cost of consuming, exhaustible resources.
Just to give you an idea, Paul, it's estimated that at present, the so-called middle income bracket of the Chinese population corresponds to approximately 350 million or so. Projections are that within the next 15, 20 years, this could rise to 1 billion. So obviously this has enormous implications in terms of choices, in terms of options. And it's probably the most existential question, not just for China, but for the planet. Mike Spence, the Nobel laureate in economics, who was at IMD a couple of months ago, and who's the head of the academic advisory board of the Fung Global Institute, says that, traditionally about 15% of the world's population has been sort of middle income and upper income, and 85% poor. And in his book, The Next Convergence, he points out this ratio is going to change, that we're going to go from 15 to 85 to 85 to 50. In other words, 85% of the population. So, this is really probably the most critical issue, and one that the planet has never had to face in the past. When other countries were industrializing, becoming rich, they didn't have to worry about the climate question. They polluted. There was no such thing as green industrialization. And so now with industrialization and urbanization in China occurring at very, very fast pace, as Xiao Geng has indicated, this is really the mother of all challenges.
So you both mentioned there that this is a challenge and a question for society, for community, for business, also for government. What is the role of the party in China in terms of the growth challenges on the road ahead?
Well, this is very interesting because the success of China in the last 30 years really starts from the Chinese governance structures, the party. The party is so important in China and is also the area people don't understand very well, China suffered almost 100 years of chaos. And during those periods, China fell behind the West. It was really the result of dealing with the crisis. The party was born. The party was born a long time ago. And eventually, the party consolidated the Chinese society. And that means that it actually provided a system to protect the property rights, to enforce property rights, and so to maintain social stability. But at the beginning, there was very little market in China, So after Deng Xiaoping's reform, the market was introduced in China. So the party actually serves as a kind of transition manager, And the Chinese model, Chinese growth model, is very much like, the picture, I paint is like the birds in a cage, and the cage is really the party, which but in the last 30 years, the cage becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So which means the birds can fly, within the space, which we call market. So that's really a very important dimension of China's success. But on the other hand, the party is going through a very important change. For example, the Chinese leaders, now they have to retire. That's not the case during Chairman Mao, 30 years ago. So now people, if you cannot promote it to more than minister ranking, you have to retire at 60. And also the Chinese president, they have a term, 2 terms, at most 10 years. So these changes are bringing the gap between the Chinese political system, closer to the Western, system. So that's the kind of change which we have seen during the last 30 years. And the system in China is trying to take advantage of both the efficiency of the market, but also the stability of so-called visible hand. So this is the Chinese experiment, which is really because of the party systems. I see it as very, very important. It is actually important for the world because we are seeing the difficulties of the so-called democracy, which creates a lot of short-term kind of policy and at the cost of long-term sustainability. And the Chinese system, I think, in a way, is very helpful, especially the experience in the last 30 years.
Again, if I can add something to this, one important element is that, as Xiao Geng has indicated, the party is still very much present in China, to put it, I guess, mildly, although there are evolutions and people just joke that, it's no longer a Marxist-Leninist state, it's a market-Leninist state. So the party is still there, but it's a market system that's functioning. The other thing, though, is commenting is that if you look at China, say, over the course of the last 30 years, as I've been privileged to be able to watch, I'd say for the first 20 years, what was really impressive was what you could call the hard elements of development: new airports, new roads, new stations, new buildings, and so on and so forth. Over the course of the last 10 years, it's really the soft aspects that have become much more interesting. The way society has evolved. For example, the fact that China is now one of the world's biggest tourist markets. I don't mean about people going to China, but Chinese going to abroad, to Europe as well as United States and so on. The Chinese have the largest number of students doing PhDs in the United States, the largest number of foreign students, I should say, doing PhDs in the United States. There's a lot of also undergraduates. In fact, the coming president has a daughter who's studying in Harvard. So it's a society in a great deal of ferment, and as Xiao Geng has indicated, there's currently a tremendous amount of debate taking place within the party.
Jean-Pierre, you recently wrote an article entitled "China is not an option but an imperative." Can you tell us a little bit more what you meant by that?
Well, the title in a way says it. I don't think one can choose whether one's going to be literate and reasonably knowledgeable about China in the business world of today. I think you could say if you can't ignore China because China won't ignore you. This is a new force. China's global reach is extensive, virtually everywhere. It's setting a new basis for competition. I think one of the mistakes, for example, that people make is to say, to bundle China with other emerging economies. I think the BRIC concept, for example, Brazil, Russia, India, China, is not particularly helpful anymore. China is different. China is different. It's huge. You go almost anywhere in the world today, and you're talking to a business person or to a government official, and within 5 minutes, the discussion will turn towards China. This is true in Brazil, it's true in Ecuador, it's true in South Africa, it's true obviously all over Asia. It's the new giant of the world economy. And just as you could not ignore the United States in the early 20th century, you can't ignore China in the early 21st century. And this means, among other things, what I insist upon is having a reasonably sophisticated knowledge of what is going on here. I find, and this depresses me a bit, that very often, as I say, it's the static images, it's stereotypes. This is a society that is changing very, very rapidly. The point that Xiao Geng made, for example, that if the 5-year plan is successful and China goes to a more consumer-oriented and a more production and export-oriented society, is going to have tremendous impact everywhere. So, if you want to survive in the 21st century global business environment, you've got to have a high degree of China insight, China knowledge, and China network, I would say. And this is incidentally something which I think the Fung Global Institute can help bring to IMD.
So gentlemen, as we wrap this up today, we've talked about the relationship between IMD and the Fung Global Institute and what each party can bring to the table. What would be for both of you, based on the discussion that we've had today, what are the key lessons, the key takeaways that you would like to leave for the business viewers watching today?
Well, I would say that the point that Jean-Pierre pointed out just a while ago is important. China is very important in the sense that it is extremely open. You look at the Chinese landscape, almost all the major multinationals, they are already in China substantively. 60% of Chinese exports are actually produced by foreign investor companies. So in that sense, China is the world. It's hard to find major multinationals that they are not already in China, and any products, iPad, all these things, they are already China content, there, although it's made in the world. So in that sense, I think I actually agree with Jean-Pierre that we cannot ignore China, but we have to recognize that China is not what we call the communist, used to call communist China. China is the China. It's actually influenced by people from all over the world, ideas from all over the world, companies from all over the world, and that's really something business should be aware of. Yeah.
Yes, I think, again, one of the things that we're trying to develop is a sort of holistic approach. If you look at, as Xiao Geng said, China is much more open. For example, if people are thinking, well, China is a bigger Japan, the comparison just doesn't work. Japan always was relatively closed in many ways. But China is quite open to foreign ideas, to foreign investments, to foreign artists. And Beijing and Shanghai are increasingly becoming global cities in a way that, for example, Tokyo and Osaka never were. So the opportunity to learn, among other things, is undoubtedly much stronger than it was in the past. There are challenges. It's not a cup of tea to do business in China. There's still going to be a period of adaptation. I also want to stress what Xiao Geng has said, is that there really is a period of considerable ferment now. Personally, I'm quite reasonably optimistic in terms of the prospects of China, but at the same time recognize that there's a lot of fragilities, there's a lot of tensions, things could go wrong. But it's the more important point to stress is that really almost irrespective of what kind of sector one's in, there are all sorts of opportunities, and it's essential to have the Chinese dimension present in any corporate strategy.
Xiao Geng, Jean-Pierre, thank you very much for joining us today from Hong Kong. We've really appreciated your insights. We're delighted to have this partnership between the two institutes, and we look forward to further research and further webcasts together as our collaboration continues. So thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.